Please welcome Dr. Todd Whitaker.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ritchie. How's everybody doing today? It's an honor and a privilege for me today to have a chance to spend some time with the most important people in the great state of Kentucky, and that's the educators that are sitting in this auditorium, and you all need to give yourselves a round of applause. Because if we've chosen education, not only have we chosen the most important profession that there is, but we've also chosen the profession with the highest standards and highest expectations of any other profession. I truly do believe if we're in education, the only acceptable standard is the standard of greatness. And that may sound kind of funny. Great, no way, not me. Well, let's just take a little quiz here. How many of you have children? How many of you want your kids to go to, pretty good schools with okay teachers? How many of you want your kids to go to schools like that? I see 2 or 3 hands. I asked 2,800 teachers that question, and 4 hands went up. And I'm assuming those 4 hands went up because their kids go to worse schools than that and have poorer teachers than that. Instead, how many of you want your children to go to outstanding schools with exemplary educators? And the challenge we face is so do the families of every single young person that walks through the doors of our schools each day. And that's a pretty tough standard, isn't it, that standard of greatness? But you know what? We knew that was a standard when we chose education, didn't we? As a matter of fact, that's probably why we chose education. And it truly is a higher standard than other professions. It truly is. Anybody here ever been in a Walmart by any chance? We got anybody here that's ever been in a Walmart? Wasn't that neat? We got that Walmart bond. I like that in a group when we have things like that in common. Well, the other day I was checking out a Walmart and I got in line with the surly clerk. Anybody ever been in that line by any chance? And I bet you there's a pretty good chance it wasn't even the same Walmart. But while I was standing in the line with the surly clerk, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm still going to come back to Walmart. Their prices are pretty good. We always do, don't we? It's an amazing thing. And I'm out of town several different days this week in several different states, and so over the weekend, I went to the bank. And I was kind of in a hurry. I was like everybody in this plate. I had way too many things on my plate. There's a long line at the bank, and while I'm standing in line at the bank, I thought to myself, you know what? I don't even care if the teller rounds off. Isn't that right? Because let's be honest, if we're in education, a few dollars either way doesn't even make any difference, does it? But it's an amazing thing, as you heard. My wife and I have 3 children. We have Catherine, who's going to be a junior in high school, Madeline, who's going to be a freshman in high school, and Harrison, who's going to be in 2nd grade, whom we are quite surprised to have, might I add. And I don't ever expect any of my children to ever have one single teacher that ever rounds off in their interest for my kids. And I don't expect any of my children or any of your children or any of the young people that walk through the doors of our schools and classes each day to ever get a surly teacher. And that's a pretty tough standard, but you know what? We knew that was a standard when we chose education. Today what we're going to talk about is we are going to talk about what it is great teachers do differently. And we're not going to talk about what it is great teachers do. We're going to talk about what it is great teachers do that others don't. You know what we're going to focus on? The difference makers. We're not going to talk about what great principals do differently. We're going to talk about what great principals do that others don't. We're going to talk about those rare elite things that only the very best people do. For example, do you all know great principals have lunch duty? Do you all know that? And you know what? That doesn't help us out because so do a bunch of the crummy ones. See, that's not a difference maker there. But you know why as a principal for 8 years I'm in the lunchroom every single day? Because here's my theory of lunch duty. When lunch is over, lunch is over. And I've learned if I'm in the lunchroom and a student throws a French fry, I have that student pick up the French fry. And that way, when lunch is over, lunch is over. And I've learned if I'm not in the lunchroom and a student throws a French fry, the lunch lady tells him to pick up the French fry, and he goes, hey, pick up your own effing French fry, and lunch ain't never over. And I decided as a principal I want lunch ending at 12:30, not 3:30, and that's the reason I'm in the lunchroom every day. And it isn't what great teachers do. Do you all know great teachers take attendance? And you know what? That doesn't help us out because so do all the other ones too. And instead we're going to focus on those rare elite things that the best people do that nobody else does. 2 biases you need to know as we go along here today. One of them is I call everybody in a school a teacher. It doesn't matter to me if they're a cook or a custodian, secretary, bus driver, teacher, assistant, librarian, counselor, assistant principal, school nurse, our teacher. I have learned that if young people see us one way or the other, we are a teacher. And I also believe that if we don't model what we teach, we're still teaching. Only we're just teaching something else. And the other thing I believe is that I believe everybody in a school is a leader, one way or the other. And some try to lead by being positive role models in the classroom, and some try to lead in the teacher's lounge. But everybody in a school is a leader, one way or the other. Well, we have a whole room full of leadership experts here, and I want to make sure we tap into that expertise. So I'm going to ask you to do something here called the leadership tree. And what I'm going to ask you to do with this leadership tree is I'm going to ask you to take a look at this leadership tree, and I'm going to ask you to choose a young lady or gentleman on this leadership tree that you feel like most represents your own personal leadership style. And I'm going to give you a minute and a half to share with your partner or partners which young lady or gentleman you chose and why you chose them as representative of your leadership style. But rather than saying, why don't you go first, no, you go first, no, you go first, why don't we do this? Within your group, whoever's birthday is coming up next is going to go first. So you have a minute and a half to figure that out, and then share with your partner or partners which young lady or gentleman you chose and why you chose them as representative of your leadership style. A minute and a half. Go ahead and get started, please. What if we came to your school and we put this down with your students? What if we put this down with your colleagues? What if we shared this with people who supervise you or people you supervise? What if we put this down with family, friends, people you know personally or people you know professionally? And we ask them to choose which person they feel like most represents your leadership style. Which one would they choose? You know, one of the biggest differences between more effective and less effective people is the ability to know how we come across, the ability to know how we're being received by others. Ineffective people lack that skill terribly. They have no idea how they come across. I'll give you an example. I wrote a book called What Great Principals Do Differently, and one of the things we do is we find more effective and less effective principals. And the single best measure of principal effectiveness is teacher input. And we have some instruments we've developed and used in which we survey teachers school by school, and we choose whole states, sections of the country, other countries, and we get all input from teachers school by school as to how effective their principal is. And anytime we ask all the teachers in a school how effective their principal is, we give the same instrument to the principal to self-reflect. So we'd ask all the teachers in your school to give input on how effective your principal is, and then ask your principal to self-reflect. And you know one of the things we found? There is no relationship whatsoever between teacher perception of principal effectiveness and principal self-perception of effectiveness. Do you know what we found? Every principal thinks they're good. And you know what else we found? The good ones are correct. And it's not just coincidence. It's the good ones are accurate in how they come across. They're accurate in how they're being received. It's interesting. If we go to a school with an effective principal as identified by their teachers, and we ask the principal to say, what do you feel like the teachers would feel like your 3 biggest strengths are, and what might be 3 potential growth areas, and we ask the teachers in those schools, the lists are exactly the same. And if we go to an ineffective principal school and we ask them to tell us what they think their 3 biggest strengths are in the eyes of the teachers and 3 potential growth areas, we ask the teachers, it's like we're in a completely different school. They have no idea how they come across. You know one other thing we've stumbled onto? Every teacher thinks they're good. And you know one other thing we've stumbled onto? Good ones are correct. Y'all ever been at a faculty meeting where a teacher stood up and said, all these years I've been complaining about the students? It's not the students. It's me! I'm just no good. It's not last year's teachers. It's not the administration. It's not the parents. It's me! But I bet every one of us have worked with people we thought ought to be standing up and saying that now, hadn't we? I'll give you an example about how we come across. Has anybody ever been in a poor lecturer's classroom? Anybody ever been in a poor lecturer's classroom? Now, when I say poor lecturer's classroom, which of those 3 words is the problem? And I'll give you a quick hint. It is not classroom. When I say poor lecturer's classroom, which of those 3 words is the problem? Lecture. You know what I hear a whole bunch of real smart people saying lecture, and you know what I hear a whole bunch of real smart people who are absolutely 100% guaranteed wrong. It's poor. It's they're no good at it. Anybody ever been in a good lecturer's classroom? Guess the problem isn't lecture after all now, is it? But isn't that funny how now lecture's the devil in education? Have you noticed that? Now everything wrong with education is lecture. You know one thing I can guarantee you? The best teacher in your school district uses lecture some of the time. But you know what? They're good at it. And you know what makes them good? They know how they come across. They're aware of how they're being received by others. And they don't all do it in the same fashion. Some of them do it completely by reading body language. Some of them do it by asking kids to give them a thumbs up or thumbs down. Some of them do it by calling on 2 kids because they know if those 2 kids got it, trust me, everybody in that classroom got it. But the challenge with a poor lecturer's classroom is this. If you walk into a poor lecturer's classroom, how long does it take you to notice the students are completely disengaged? About 20 seconds. And you're thinking, can't that teacher tell? And the answer is, no, they can't. Tell me why you think they're going to catch on today. That's what the students have looked like for 23 consecutive years. Why do you think today the teacher's going to look out, know something's wrong, and more important, know what to do about it? Do you all know the people who can figure it out on their own have already figured it out on their own? Did you know if you student teach with an exemplary teacher, the likelihood of you being effective yourself is exponentially higher? You know how come? Because you know one way that works. The challenge with ineffective people isn't that they don't know 3 ways that work. The challenge with ineffective people is they don't know one way that works. And you know how I know they don't know one way that works? Because they'd be doing it. You don't keep that stuff secret, do you? You don't have something where you're going, this will improve student behavior, build better relationships with parents, and dramatically increase test scores. But I'm going to go ahead and hold that off till 09. You don't do that, do you? You go ahead and bring it in right away. We all do the best we know how. And if you ever question teachers do the best they know how, all you have to do is think of classroom management. You know how come I know every single teacher in your state does the best they know how at classroom management? Because classroom management's selfish. If any of us could get the kids to behave better, what would we do? We'd get the kids to behave better. The best teacher in a school, I mean, of course, you know, besides yourself, the best teacher in a school who can get their kids to do absolutely anything, if they could get their kids to behave even better, what would they do? They'd get their kids to behave even better. We do the very best we know how. You know who else does the very best they know how? Every one of your parents. And you know the other thing your parents do? The parents bring you the very best ones they got. I know some of you all are thinking, no, they must keep a couple of them at home with them. Tomorrow morning, they go ahead and drop off all 5. They don't sort and sift. They just go ahead and bring them all. Do you know that? You all know who else does the best they know how? Every one of your students. How many of you have students that do not know how to apologize? And if you ask them to apologize, what do? They come up and they go, sorry, and then they really tick the people off, don't they? And do you know why that's the way they apologized? It's the best way they know how. And you can think their parents should have taught them. And anytime a teacher ever tells me their parents should have taught them, you know what I tell that teacher? Well, of course their parents should have taught them. But they didn't. And now we have to make a choice. We can teach and model it, or we can whine about it. And did you know in every school represented here today, you have people that choose to teach and model it, and you have people that choose to whine about it. But you know what that is? That's a choice. And if you don't make it clear to people that's a choice, did you know you have people that do not know whining is a choice? They think it's an obligation. And you know how come? Because when they were 1 year old, they whined, and it worked. When they were 5 years old, they whined, and it worked. They married somebody who supports them in whining. Their only 2 friends at school support them when they whine. They whine because it works. That's the reason they do it. Nobody repeats a behavior without a reward, and that's their reward. You ever work with anybody, you don't have to point now, but you ever work with anybody that other people say, can't they tell nobody likes them? I said you don't have to point, but you ever work with anybody that other people say, can't they tell nobody likes them? You know what the answer to that question is? No, they can't. Tell me why you think they're going to catch on today. Did you know as people we have the same interpersonal skills at work that we have away from work? If you've ever worked with anybody who gripes and whines and complains all the time at work, can I tell you something? Away from work, their nickname is not Chuckles. And it's understanding how we come across, how we're being received by others. Anybody here ever been in a store where a store clerk treated you rudely because the last customer treated them rudely? And I bet you every one of you has been in a store where a store clerk didn't treat you rudely regardless of how the last customer treated them. Because you know what that is? That's a choice. About what percent of teachers in your schools do you think are going to have issues going on in their personal lives this year? Right about what percent? Does anybody have any guess? I don't want to have to take off my shoes in front of you to decipher, but I'm guessing it's right at 100%. But you know something, folks? Some of those people will never bring those issues into the classroom, and some of them will wave them in every day. Because you know what that is? That's a choice. That's a choice. Why do we care about great? You know why we care about great? Because we can only learn from effective people. People tell me all the time you can learn from anybody, but you need to know something, folks, that's just not true. You cannot just learn from anybody. You can only learn from effective people. And you know why you can only learn from effective people? Because everything involving teaching is so complex. We never have two choices in the classroom. You know what we have in the classroom? 200 choices every time anyone asks us. It isn't when students ask us a question, the choices are yes or no. The choices are, how do I say yes? When do I say yes? At what point do I say yes? Do I tell all the other kids that I've told them yes? Do I not tell the other kids that I've told them yes? Am I going to tell their parents, call their parents, phone their parents, email their parents, wait till they come in for a conference, send a note home? Am I going to tell the principal, set up a time with the principal, wait until the principal comes by? Am I going to email the principal? Am I going to leave them a phone message? Am I going to put a note in their mailbox? It's so complicated. See, I was a terrible student in school, and I'm not kidding, I mean terrible. All through school, my theory was if it wasn't good enough, it wouldn't be the minimum, and I pretty much lived by that theory, let me tell you. And I know some of y'all graduated, you don't have to stand up, but some of y'all graduated magna cum laude, and some of y'all graduated summa cum laude. I don't really like to brag, but I graduated thank you laude, so keep that in mind. There's lots of ways to say yes in there. You know what the real issue with teaching is? Tone and manner. That's really the issue with teaching is tone and manner. That's why it's so complex. A student asks you a question, you can say, yes, thank you so much for asking. That'd be wonderful, and I'd love to see how that turns out. Or a student can ask you for a question, and you go, yeah, whatever, go ahead. You know what, folks? There's more than two choices there, isn't there? And if you student teach with an ineffective teacher, the problem is you're on your own to figure it out, and the people who can figure it out on their own, they've already figured it out on their own. And you know why we care about great? Because we're in education. See, I love it when the clerk at Walmart is nice to me. That means a great deal to me. I love it. But my kids' teachers had better be nice to them because it's so much more important. And we knew that when we chose education. What is it great teachers do differently? One thing great teachers do differently is they understand it is people, it's not programs. Do you all know if you have great teachers, you have a great school? And do you know if you don't have great teachers, you don't have a great school? And nothing else is ever going to determine that? But isn't that funny how we think programs are the problem or programs are the solution? People are the problem and people are the solution. People are always going to be the problem and people are always going to be the solution. Do you know why programs come and go in education so much? Because whatever the new program is, the crummy people can't do that one either. That's the reason. You tell me what on earth program you're going to bring in that's going to fix the worst teacher you've ever known. There's no chance in the world it's going to do it. But you know what happens when we bring a new program in? The very best teachers get invested in it. They start to believe in it. They start to bring it in their classroom. Ineffective people can't do it, so you know what happens? They now yank the program out and tear the scabs off the good people. It's like block scheduling at the high school. What's your choice? Do you want an ineffective teacher every day for 50 minutes, or do you want the ineffective teacher every other day for 90 minutes? And we're going, block scheduling didn't seem to work. I don't see what the problem is there. It's the most amazing thing. You know, the example of the poor lecturer's classroom, how we got confused and we thought the problem was lecture because somebody's told us the problem was lecture. The problem was poor. We get so confused. I'll give you an example. I was recently asked to keynote a state high school principals conference 4 years from now. And they asked me to come and speak on their theme of their conference. And I said, I don't know, what's your theme? And they said, futurism. I said, futurism? What on earth are you talking about? They said, we'd like you to come and talk about the future. I said, I'm sorry. I go, I don't know anything about the future. I go, I'm sorry. Well, let me correct myself. There is one thing I do know about the future, and actually I learned that when I was in elementary school. And that's that any day now, we are going metric. I said, other than that, I don't know nothing about the future. And you know why that's so funny? Because some of us told our students this year that we're going metric. And what's amazing is, you know where we learned it? From one of our elementary teachers, no matter how many years ago that was. And we just go ahead and repeat it. We know it isn't true, but we go ahead and repeat it. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Can I tell you a little secret about that poor lecturer's classroom? Their second best teaching technique is worse. And you know how come I know their second best teaching technique's worse? Because if they had a better one, they'd be doing it. You ever work with a teacher that sits behind their desk too much? Do you know why they sit behind their desk too much? Most people think it's because they're lazy. It's not because they're lazy. It's because they're scared. It's because they don't know what to do on the other side of the desk. And folks, we don't want them on the other side of the desk until we teach them what to do on the other side of the desk. But once we teach them what to do on the other side of the desk, now we can want and expect them to be on the other side of the desk. It's amazing how programs come and go. Give you an example, assertive discipline. You all know what assertive discipline is? Just so we're all on the same page, if I'm a teacher and I'm using assertive discipline and a student acts up, what do? Oh, put his name on the board. That's where we're going today in terms of gender, huh? Bring back that elementary school bitterness for me right there, let me tell you. I got in the principal preparation program at the University of Missouri. And I had actually, because I'd logged so many office hours during my elementary, middle school, and high school years, they went ahead and gave me 6 hours credit for an internship there, so keep that in mind. Put their name on the board. If a student acts up again, what do? Check mark. And if a student acts up again, what do? Check mark. Georgia Humphreys is the best teacher I've ever worked with in my life. She still teaches at Lewis and Clark Middle School in Jefferson City, Missouri. Georgia and I worked together for 7 years. During that 7 years, I was in Georgia Humphreys' classroom at least 300 or 400 times. Because I believe principals have to be in classrooms every single day. And I believe assistant principals have to be in classrooms every single day. And you know when I learned this? I learned this my first year as a high school principal. Because you know what I discovered? I discovered that the student who gets sent to the office is the least important student in the school. And I've learned that we make them out to be the most important student in the school. And it's amazing how much we punish people for being good. I was recently working with a school that had a problem with students writing on the stall doors in the bathrooms. You all know what I'm talking about, inside the bathroom writing on the stall doors, and the school couldn't catch the students. So you know what the school did? Took down the stall doors. And you know why they took down the stall doors, don't you? Because they decided the student writing on the stall doors was the most important student in the school. And in my mind, the student writing on the stall doors is the least important student in the school. And that doesn't mean I don't want to catch them. That doesn't mean I don't want to stop them. That doesn't mean there won't be consequences. But in the meantime, why would I want to punish all the other kids for being good? I don't understand that.